Chapter 1 She's Back. Oliver awoke at 7 p.m. to see the crimson-colored sun sinking into the faraway distance. Oliver had slept throughout the day in order to preserve his energy for the night, for he was a creature of the night. A man who lived under the dimly lit moon and moved only within the shadows. This was Oliver Page, the vampire. Oliver got out of bed and walked over to the window to watch the waves of the ocean crash against the rocks. He watched as the ocean breathed in and out while trying to match its tempo with his own breathing. Oliver thought to himself how he had missed the days where he could walk for miles along the beach with the waves brushing up against his feet, the days where he could walk freely amongst the humans as one of them, the days before he was cursed. Those days were long gone but never forgotten. While Oliver looked out at the world deeply entranced by his own thoughts, his concentration was broken by the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. It was Trevor, his loyal companion and servant, holding a glass of blood for his master. "Good evening, sir. It's almost time for your meeting with Mr. Arthur Carrick," said Trevor. "Why do you think Arthur has contacted me after so long?" asked Oliver while turning to face Trevor and taking the drink from his hand. "He's made me fly halfway across the world to come see him, but he couldn't even tell me what it was about. Mr. Carrick only gets in touch when it's important, sir. I'm sure he didn't give you all the details for a good reason. This doesn't sit well with me. However, I cannot ignore it. Bring the car around, Trevor. Let us see what this immortal bastard wants with me." Oliver arrived at the bar where he was to meet with Arthur. He instructed Trevor to wait for him in the car, and then made his way inside. The bar was called Millennium, and was owned by another vampire by the name of Richard Stark. Every mythical creature knew of this bar, for it held one of several portals that served as a bridge between Earth and the realm of Albec, the realm in which most of the mythical creatures resided in, a place that Oliver had no interest in visiting unless it was of great importance. The bar was dimly lit and barely had any people in it. Oliver looked around thinking of how it had been decades since he last visited the bar, yet nothing had changed. Oliver was immediately noticed by Richard, the bar owner, who invited him in and greeted him warmly. "I have not seen you in a long time, my old friend. What brings you here?" "I have a meeting with Arthur," replied Oliver. "What about?" "Beats me." "Well, let me take you downstairs and you can ask him yourself." Richard led Oliver through to the back of the bar, where they walked through the kitchen, and to the freezer that stood at the far end of the room. "New door?" asked Oliver. "Yeah, the big shiny one was drawing a little too much attention," replied Richard sarcastically. Richard pulled out a key that was on a chain around his neck, and unlocked the door. "I'll see you on the other side. I just have to round up a few things here." Oliver nodded and walked through the door. The Millennium Bar was not just an establishment that held a portal within it that separated the two realms, but the bar itself lied on the borderline of the two realms, and existed in both places simultaneously. When Oliver walked through the portal, he found himself walking through the same front door he had walked through when he first entered the bar on Earth. The bar was identical in every way, except for the energy of the place. The place was filled with customers of all races. Vampires, werewolves, goblins, and any other creature you might have believed to be a myth. Once again, Oliver made his way to the bar, but this time it was to order a drink. When Oliver sat down at the bar, the bartender placed a napkin down in front of him with the scotch. Oliver, a little confused, called the bartender back and asked, "What is this?" "Well, your drink was already ordered and paid for, sir." "By who?" "By me, Oliver." Oliver knew this voice. It had been over a century since he had last heard it, but it was something that he'd never forget. Oliver turned his body and looked to the man sitting beside him. The man wore a black suit with a black tie and a fedora that was slightly tiled to the side. "How did you know what I was going to order?" "Well, I am an information broker, so I have to know everyone's business. But if I have to be honest, Oliver, I've known you for years and you've always ordered the same thing." Oliver drank the entire glass in one go, and then signaled for another. "Why am I here, Arthur?" "You might want to down that second glass first, then ask for the bottle and come with me." The two picked up their drinks and made their way to a small table at the back of the bar, far from all the ruckus and all the types of pandemonium you'd expect to find in a bar like this. "She's back, Oliver." "What do you mean? Who's back?" "Helena, Oliver, Helena." Oliver looked down at the table, feeling completely confused, trying to process what he had just heard. Oliver gripped onto the glass in his hand so tightly that he didn't feel the glass crack, and the shards of glass cutting into his skin. "Tell me everything." "If you insist." The lift opened and Alice Grayson emerged with 2 coffees in hand and rushed to her cubicle. She could not afford to be late again, seeing as it wouldn't be the first or second time this week. She rushed over to her cubicle, where she found her colleague and best friend Sammy waiting in her chair. "And here, I thought you weren't coming in today," said Sammy with a grin on her face. I thought for sure you had a hangover after last night. I didn't drink last night, said Alice as she passed Sammy her coffee. I'm late because I was following up on a lead. Seems like it didn't pan out though. I'll have to retrace my steps and interview whoever is willing to talk. That sounds great, said Sammy, but I had quite a bit to drink, so thank you and thank God Almighty for this coffee, as she brought the coffee to her lips. Get up, Sammy, my feet are killing me, groaned Alice. Okay, said Sammy as she jumped out of Alice's seat. Alice sat down and immediately kicked off her heels, and hid them under her desk while slumping into her seat until her head was completely out of view under the walls of her cubicle. Alice untied her bun and let her hair fall down. Feeling as if the bun she had made before leaving for work was starting to pull out brain cells, she let loose. She rubbed at her eyes, trying to force the sleep out of them. Ah! groaned Alice while stretching her arms over the walls of her cubicle. Did you see the guy standing in Christina's office? Alice pulled herself out of her seat and peeked out of her cubicle to be able to see who Sammy was talking about. The man wore a well-tailored pinstripe suit and wore his hair back. He looked important for sure. What do you think they're talking about? Asked Sammy. I don't know, but it looks like they're done. Christina led the man out of her office, thanking him for the opportunity, and walked him towards the elevator. She turned around and made her way towards Alice and the rest of the journalists who'd been watching the interaction take place the entire time. Can I please get everyone's attention? Said Christina while standing in the middle of the bullpen. The man that just left my office is from a charity organization that is looking to raise money for the underprivileged and homeless. They will be hosting an event next week, and would like all the major papers to attend. Apparently some mysterious benefactor popped out of nowhere and no one knows who he is. He donated $250 million towards the charity, and the charity's chairperson, the man who just left my office, wants the best coverage. So tell me who's available. Sammy. No can do, boss, replied Sammy. I have a solid lead for the hijackings that have been occurring by the docks. I have too much on my plate. Brian. I can't at the moment, boss. I have the public park article to wrap up. Alice? Are you available? Well, I do have quite a bit of work, but sure, I can do it. Okay, great, replied Christina. The article is yours. Gotcha, boss, replied Alice. Christina nodded in agreement and then made her way back to her office. Why did I say yes to that article? Sighed Alice while slumping back into her chair. I have so much work as well. Plus, Christina really wants this article to go well. You saw how happy she looked while walking that guy out of her office. Don't worry, you'll be fine, said Sammy, still sipping at her coffee. You just have to attend the fundraiser and write an article on this guy who made the big donation. He's probably some old man that's coming to the end of his life and doesn't know what to do with the money. Plus, these events always have open bars. Yeah, you're right, said Alice, now sounding a bit more enthusiastic. I have been trying to get more FaceTime with Christina. I'm sure this is my big break. That's my girl. Now tell me, what are you going to wear? Chapter 3 Worlds Collide. Hale, Alice's mother, had not been doing too well for the past couple of months and had been in and out of hospital. The medical bills were starting to pile up, and Alice, being the only one in the house being able to work, had a world of pressure on her shoulders, way too much for someone her age. The two of them had lived alone ever since Alice's father walked out on them when Alice was still just a child. She didn't know his name and she didn't care. Her mother was her mother and father, and she did an excellent job at both, but now it was Alice's turn to take care of her mother. Alice leaned over her mother, who was asleep, and put her hand on her forehead to check if she had started heating up again. She then kissed her mother and made for the door when she heard her mother's voice. Alice, where are you going? Asked Hale in a low tone as if she struggled to let the words out. I'm going to a fundraiser, Mom. I'll be home late, so don't forget to take your medication, okay? Okay, my dear. But Alice, just one more thing. Yes, Mom. You look beautiful. Alice smiled and walked back over to kiss her mother on the forehead again. Thanks, Mom. Now get some rest. Alice arrived early to the fundraiser. She wore a blue sapphire dress that fit her slender body perfectly and wore her hair down. Both her hair and dress flowed like a beautiful river that reflected the night sky. Alice walked into the hall where she was met by hundreds of influential people from across the world, people she would not usually have the pleasure of mingling with so early on in her career. She felt the tension in her shoulders and did not hesitate to grab a glass of champagne from every waiter that passed her within the first hour. As the alcohol set in, so did her ease, and Alice found that the tension had left her body. However, she still found it difficult to move around the room. She felt an aura of intimidation from all the guests around her. Alice felt as if she were in another world, but soon found herself entranced their ways. Elderly men accompanied by women young enough to be their daughters, caviar being served on silver trays and champagne that would probably cost her 2 months of her salary. Alice wanted to engage, but what could she possibly be able to add to the conversation? What insight did a 22-year-old have that these wealthy men and women didn't already possess? "Don't be fooled by all of them," said a voice from beside her. Alice looked and noticed a handsome young man, with golden hair and blue eyes standing right next to her. He smiled while looking in the same direction as she was. "What do you mean?" asked Alice. "Well, a lot of these people only gained wealth to receive the recognition that came with it. Those young women don't actually like those men, they like their money. And the crazy thing is, men are completely aware of this." "How so?" "Well, men are extremely fragile creatures, especially their egos. Men hate feeling inferior, and most of all they hate rejection. That is why men work so hard to get the higher paying jobs, and spend longer hours in the gym, not just to feel more empowered, but because of their fear of rejection." "Are you sure you're a man? You sure like calling them out on their bullshit," joked Alice. "Well, I would like to think I'm an okay guy, I guess," replied the man. The two laughed. "So why are you here tonight?" asked the man. "This doesn't look like your sort of crowd." "Well, I'm actually a journalist," said Alice. "I'm not sure if you heard about the mystery man who made this big donation towards this charity, but I'm trying to land an interview with him for an article I'm writing. I hope he shows soon though. He probably thinks the world revolves around him with the type of money he has. He actually doesn't sound like that bad of a guy if he's making such a big donation." The man laughed. "I think he might just be late. Who knows?" The two spoke for quite a long time until the MC of the event, the same man who came out of Christina's office a few days ago, came up on stage, and the two turned to face him. "Welcome everyone. I hope you all have had enough to drink, and that your night is going great. I would like to thank each and every one of you for your contributions towards the charity. I'm sure tonight will change many people's lives. I would, however, like to welcome a specific benefactor to stage. The man who contributed $250 million towards our project. So everyone, please give a round of applause to the man of the evening, Oliver Page." "Excuse me," said the man. "Where are you going?" asked Alice. "Well, they just called my name," said Oliver as he turned to her with a smile and then turned back towards the stage and made his way up. Alice watched as Oliver climbed the steps of the stage, still confused about what had just happened. Was that really him? She thought to herself. She watched in awe as he started his speech. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Oliver Page, and believe it or not, I am no one special. I am just someone who understands struggle and found it very difficult to see what had happened to me. Happened to millions across the world. Not just me, but all of us in this room. We all have a duty to humanity, and we have the power to do it. So let us do it together. Thank you." The crowd clapped and cheered as Oliver made his way down the stage with people surrounding him. How entitled he looked, thought Alice to herself, unaware that he was making his way back to her. "Hello again," said Oliver, now standing in front of Alice. "Would you perhaps like to go for dinner sometime? I'll even give you that interview." Oliver laughed. Alice, now feeling a bit silly having not asked the man his name while they spoke for so long, looked away and then looked back at him. "Only if you promise to come on time," said Alice with a smile. The limo pulled up in front of the restaurant and Alice looked out of the window somewhat confused. "I don't know this place," she exclaimed. "Well, actually, I've been coming here for many years and I am very good friends with the owner," said Oliver as he moved up to look at the restaurant through the window beside her. "I didn't know you visited New York that often," said Alice. "Well, my business takes me all over the world, but wherever I go, I always find myself coming back to New York to breathe in the city. But hey, let's eat," said Oliver with a warm smile. Alice reached for the door to open it when Oliver stopped her. "Wait." Oliver jumped out of his side of the limo and rushed over to open the door for Alice. "Well, that was a little unexpected," said Alice. "Don't you billionaire types let your drivers do this sort of thing?" Oliver giggled. "Yes, we do, but I couldn't give Trevor this honor." Oliver put his hand out and helped Alice out of the limo, and the two made their way inside. When they got into the restaurant, Alice realized that the place was actually much nicer than she expected, judging from how it looked from the outside and the area that it was in. The lighting was bright and the theme of the restaurant looked like a mixture of Greek and Italian. But weirdly enough, the look worked. When they walked through the door, they were greeted by the hostess, asking them if they had made a reservation. Oliver shook his head and Alice, feeling a bit embarrassed by how full the restaurant was, didn't think they were going to get a table. "Let's just go somewhere else," said Alice. "I'm sure you can't just slip this hostess some money and magically get a table." "Wait, is that a thing? Can I do that?" asked Oliver. "No, you can't," Alice laughed. As the two stood in front by the check-in, the owner Tom Reed noticed Oliver and came over to the check-in. "Oliver, is that you?" asked Tom. "Yes, Tom, it's me," said Oliver as he embraced Tom. "You still look exactly the same since I last saw you. I, on the other hand, have gotten old and I can't seem to get this kink out of my back," said Tom. "But who is this with you?" Tom turned to face Alice, but as soon he looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. "Good evening," said Alice with a warm smile. "Good evening," said Tom while trying to hide his emotions. "It's very nice to meet you." Tom signaled to the hostess that he would sort out their seating and led Oliver and Alice to a table with a reserved sign on it at the back of the restaurant. "Here we are," said Tom. "I will go and get everything prepared." "Thank you," said Oliver, and Tom walked to the kitchen. "What was that all about?" asked Alice. "Why did he get so emotional when he saw me? Maybe he thought you were someone else?" "Who knows?" Oliver laughed. Tom returned with a bottle of red wine and placed it on the table. "Your meals are almost complete." "But we haven't even ordered," Alice called out, but Tom had already left for the kitchen again, not hearing her at all. Oliver poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Alice. "I hope you like it," said Oliver. Alice took a sip of the wine, and surely enough she did. The wine was great. "So tell me more about yourself," said Oliver as he sipped his wine. "Well, there's not much to say. I've lived in Queens my entire life, busted my ass off to get a college scholarship, and now I'm trying to make a name for myself at my magazine." "How about family?" asked Oliver. "My father walked out on me and my mother when I was still just a child. For a long time I blamed myself for being born, thinking that I was the reason he had left. Turns out he was just an asshole that couldn't care less. But hey, you aren't here to interview me. I'm here to interview you." Yes, I apologize, I just wanted to get to know the person who was interviewing me as well. But okay, what would you like to know?" "Well, for starters, how did you make your money?" "I made my money acquiring property around the world, but if I have to be perfectly honest, most of it is old money." "So you inherited it?" "Something like that, yes." "Okay, and what about the fundraiser?" "What about it?" asked Oliver. "Well, up until a few days ago no one knew who you were, but somehow you just popped onto the scene with that outrageous donation. I understand the feeling of wanting to help those less fortunate than us, but what made you donate the money out of the blue? Was it just for media attention?" Oliver leaned back into his chair, looking as if he was trying to gather his thoughts while rubbing the bottom of his chin. "Would you believe me if I told you I made that big donation just to get your attention?" asked Oliver. Alice looked at him confused. No, I wouldn't," she replied. Oliver laughed. "I'm only joking," he said. "I have made all this money over all these years and I have traveled the entire world countless times, and all that it taught me was money isn't everything. Money can't buy happiness and it cannot bring back the dead. Or break curses." "What do you mean? Did you lose someone important to you?" "Yes, many years ago. And ever since then my life has never been the same." The two continued to speak about Oliver's past until they were interrupted by Tom, who had brought their food. "The steak for you as always, Mr. Page, and for the lady the pasta. Please enjoy." Oliver thanked Tom and the two started their meal. "How is the food?" asked Oliver. "I don't know," said Alice. "It's great. But there's something else about it that I can't figure out. Why does it taste so familiar?" Oliver smiled on as he watched Alice enjoy her meal. After the meal was done, the two continued their conversation while ordering another bottle of wine. "Tell me about your travels," said Alice. "I have never left New York, so tell me, what's out there that I won't be able to find in a magazine?" "The world can be a big or small place depending on the lens you look at it with," Oliver started. "My travels have taken me to many places you wouldn't be able to find in a book. Or maybe you could find it in a book, but the book has been lost to history." "What type of places?" asked Alice, sounding very interested. "Do you mean Atlantis?" she joked. No, Oliver laughed. "But these places do have rich histories that speak about ancient civilizations that weren't exactly human. For example, the hieroglyphics within the pyramids in ancient Egypt and the Aztec temples in South America. Both have imagery of beings with reptilian heads and the bodies of men and women. It is said that in ancient times, people would give offerings to these beings in the form of food and sometimes even offer up the lives of their children. They feared that these beings would take everything from them, like vampires who suck the nutrients from the very earth under their feet, cursing them to a life of hardship and torment." "So what do you believe?" asked Alice. "I believe there are many things in this life that we have yet to figure out. I am not someone who rules out the possibility of the impossible." Alice looked at Oliver, not being able to put her finger on it, but there was something about him that she found alluring and different. It wasn't her instincts as a journalist that made her want to know more, but her curiosity as a woman. Chapter 5. The morning after. Oliver drove home while looking out of the window of the limo, watching as the world passed him by. He could not stop smiling, for the night was a success and things were going according to plan. "How was your evening, sir?" asked Trevor as he watched his master through the rearview mirror of the limo, watching as his master looked out at the world with a glimmer of hope in his eyes that Trevor had not seen from his master in decades. "It was great, Trevor," replied Oliver. "She was exactly how I remembered her. Her quirks, her smile, her long black hair. Everything was exactly how I remembered it to be. However, there's something about this that has been bugging me ever since I learned that Helena had been reincarnated into Alice Grayson." "What is it? Why did I find out about her reincarnation so late, and why did it take so long for her to be reincarnated again? So many things about this doesn't add up." "I believe you should give it time," said Trevor. "Her memories have not started to come back yet, so enjoy your time with her, because you don't know when they will return, spelling the end of her existence in this lifetime. You have waited for her for 81 years. You deserve to be happy." "Thank you, Trevor." Alice sat at her desk the next morning, chewing at the tip of her pencil trying to figure out what to write for her article, but found it difficult to formulate anything because she didn't have much to go on. She remembered taking her notebook to the interview, but not once taking it out to take notes. She tried thinking about the man that she had spent her night with, and things she had learned about him that would interest her readers, but what did she actually know about him? He seemed very much like a people's person, but had a look of loneliness in his eyes. He was interesting and open to conversation, but not open enough to let any personal details about him be known. Could she write about how he accumulated his wealth? Maybe, but he was very vague when speaking about the topic. He said that it was old money but didn't mention family at all. He seemed more interested in getting to know her than she in getting to know him. What a joke, she thought to herself. Alice typed and deleted and typed again, getting frustrated that the article couldn't just write itself. She reached for her water bottle but then realized it was empty when picking it up, irritating her even more and throwing the bottle to the ground. "You okay over there?" asked Sammy while sticking her head over the cubicle to check on her friend. "I don't know, Sammy," replied Alice. "I'm pretty sure my career is over. Christina really wanted the article for this Mr. Page to go well, but last night at dinner we spoke about everything but him. All I know is that he's kind, handsome and has blue eyes that put the Atlantic to shame. Worst part is I really want to see him again, but for all the wrong reasons. Damn girl, why are you beating yourself up for wanting to see a man again? You just mentioned all the traits of a man that I would definitely throw my career away for. The only thing you didn't mention was that he had a great ass." "Well, he did," replied Alice. "Ah, then you're screwed. Too bad he didn't ask you out for a second date." "Last night wasn't a date, Sammy. Get over yourself," snapped Alice. "Well, I'm not too sure about that," said Sammy as her eyes followed a man holding a giant bouquet of roses walking in her and Alice's direction. "I'm pretty sure those aren't for me." "Hi, I am looking for Alice Grayson," said the delivery man who was now standing in front of Alice and Sammy. "Hi, that's me," said Alice. "Hi, Miss Grayson, this was sent from Mr. Page and also, he asked for me to give you this note." The delivery man handed Alice the bouquet of roses and the note and then made his way out. Alice opened the note to check what it said. "I thoroughly enjoyed our time last night. I am also aware that I probably wasn't open enough with you to give you enough information for your article, so please allow me the chance to make it up to you tonight by taking you out. I will meet you in Central Park at 8 p.m. From O. Page." Alice looked up from the note and thought to herself, the nerve of this. Chapter 6. The start of winter. After a while of fighting with her inner self, she came to the conclusion that it was worth it, and that the cold was just a byproduct of her future success at the magazine. She looked at her watch that read 7:55 p.m., asking herself if she was this desperate to see Oliver that she would come before the designated time, not even thinking of coming a minute later in order to create any mystery around herself, making him think if she was the one who was coming or not. But no, she wanted to see him. The next 5 minutes felt like an eternity as Alice watched the seconds pass and felt the cold starting to get to her, making her shiver quite a bit. She put her hands together and rubbed them while blowing warm air into them in order to stop her fingers from turning into popsicles. She pulled at the sleeves of her cardigan and tried tucking her hands into them. As she struggled to get her hands into her sleeves, Oliver emerged from around the corner holding 2 coffees. "Hi," said Oliver excitedly as he waved at Alice. Alice turned to face Oliver and felt all the irritability she had built up waiting for him, just leaving her body as she turned to face him with a smile that grew wide on her face. She was happy to see him. Hey, said Alice as she walked towards him. I'm sorry that I'm late. I tried getting here earlier, but as I was walking over, I decided to grab us a couple of coffees. I hope you didn't wait too long for me. No, I also just got here, Alice lied. Oliver saw that her hands were tucked into her sleeves and put the coffees down on a bench. What are you doing? I thought I was getting one of those, said Alice. Well, I don't want you to freeze to death before even getting a chance to even drink the coffee. Here, put this on. Oliver took off his coat and put it on Alice, rubbing her arms to cause some friction, heating her body up. Thank you, said Alice while looking deeply into Oliver's eyes as he stood not even a foot away from her. She held her breath, for she didn't know what was about to happen, but luckily for her, Oliver pulled away and picked up the coffees and handed one to her. That was close, thought Alice to herself. She did not want to give in to temptation, for she had a job to do, an interview to perform. The two walked through the park and Alice asked Oliver all the questions she had wanted to ask him the previous night. Who was his family? Where was he from? Oliver had rehearsed his answers all day because he knew that they were coming, and he was fully prepared to answer them all. Oliver told Alice about his family and his relationship with his father, and how it was very difficult to impress him, for he had unrealistic expectations of his children. He told her about his siblings and that he hadn't seen his family in a very long time. He also told her about the love of his life who he lost and how painful it was. He told her parts of the truth and sometimes lied. He did not want to tell her anything that might trigger her memories, for her memories were the key to her demise. Alice listened attentively, and did not let him drag her into his own topics that would derail the interview like the night before. For just as Oliver rehearsed his answers all day, Alice too prepared for the showdown, preparing her questions. Alice acted professionally to the end and did not let her temptation take over, for she did feel some type of attraction to him, but it wasn't the money, the looks, or the conversation. No, it was something that she couldn't explain. Alice completed her interview feeling satisfied with her findings. She then thanked Oliver for being a little more cooperative this time around. They said their goodbyes and Alice tried giving Oliver his coat back, but he absolutely refused, which Alice could not lie was very sweet. The two walked in opposite directions, not saying another word to another. As the two parted ways, neither looked back, but both walked with a smile on their face. Alice feeling accomplished, and Oliver getting to enjoy time with his soulmate. Oliver wanted to turn around and just call out to her, asking her to see him tomorrow night, but didn't feel brave enough. But as he walked on in deep thought, his trance was broken from a voice behind him. It was Alice. Let's get Chinese tomorrow night, okay? Oliver turned around and stood still for a second before running back to Alice and putting his warm hands on her face, pulling her towards him, kissing her deeply. She did not expect this, but she couldn't find it in her to pull back, for she wanted it, and slowly, she felt herself pulling him now into her, letting loose of all her temptation towards him. She felt the heat of pleasure run through her body, making her warm and wet. She could not fight it anymore, she wanted him. Oliver pulled away and opened his eyes while Alice did the same. They looked at one another and both knew what the other was thinking. Why could this moment not last forever? But eventually Alice pulled away and kissed Oliver once again. This time on the cheek, and said her goodbyes and walked into the night. Wait, one more thing, said Oliver. It's a yes on the Chinese tomorrow night. Alice turned and smiled and then continued on her way. Oliver watched on before turning and walking in the opposite direction once again. As Oliver walked through the park, he stopped by a fountain and decided to sit by a bench while looking at the reflection of the moon. He started to think about Helena and how their only sin was loving one another. He hated the idea that Alice would be destined to a fate that no one deserved. He wanted to break the curse for her. Chapter 7. A line being crossed. As Alice walked through the park, she put her hands in the pockets of Oliver's coat, and pulled the collar to her face to breathe in his scent. She walked with a hop in her step, for she was happy. Temptation did not stand in the way of her career, and her career did not stop her from giving in to temptation. However, the coat she had been wearing, although warm, did not reach down to her legs, and because she had been wearing a pencil skirt, her legs were exposed and the cold started to seep in ever so slightly, making Alice pick up the pace till she could get to the road and get a taxi home. But as she walked along the path, the amount of people that passed her by had completely thinned out, and she was now alone on the path. Alice watched as the trees cluttered and rustled around her as she walked in the darkness of the night. Alice looked behind her and thought she saw the shadow of a man, and it made her pick up her pace once more. She walked vigorously and could not be more eager to get to the road. She turned around and saw the shadow was gone, but she did not feel less afraid, actually the opposite. She walked quickly, her senses on high alert. She heard the sound of the bushes rustling once again around her, but this time it was different. She could hear the sound of twigs being snapped as if they were being trampled on, as if someone was following her through the bushes. Oliver heard the sound of a scream. He recognized the voice, and it was Alice. He jumped off the bench and ran through the trees at top speed, following the sound of her voice and also her scent. Oliver got onto the path and found Alice's notebook lying on the floor. He stopped to close his eyes and listen to the sounds around him. "There!" he shouted before opening his eyes and jumping once again into the bushes, running full speed towards Alice. When Oliver found Alice, a man with a gray hoodie stood over her beaten body and her clothes ripped to shreds. Alice looked pretty hurt but alive. Oliver looked on, enraged by the sight before his eyes. He could feel the blood boiling from inside of him and his fangs start to grow along with his nails. It was as if the transformation had ripped him of his humanity. Oliver charged at Alice's attacker in a fit of rage, but the attacker easily dodged it. He turned to face Oliver and Oliver saw that the attacker also had fangs. He was also a vampire. Why would a vampire target Alice? Oliver couldn't care less about figuring that now though. The only thing on his mind was ripping out this man's throat. Once again, Oliver charged at the attacker, now grabbing his jacket and pulling him towards him as he tried striking the attacker in his face with his claws. Oliver managed to swipe him and the blood gushed from his face. The attacker stuck out his tongue as the blood ran to his mouth and laughed before taking initiative, now going after Oliver. The two exchanged blows, with Oliver being beaten to a pulp but also not letting up, giving back as much he got and eventually gaining the upper hand. Oliver threw the attacker against the tree, trying to break his back. "What the FCK have you done?" shouted Oliver while kicking the attacker in the ribs as he lied helplessly at his feet. Oliver got down to his knees and started pummeling the face of the hopeless creature that had made the biggest mistake of his insignificant life. Oliver got up and hit the tree, breaking off a piece of wood, sharpening it in order to stake the vampire that had hurt the person he treasured most, the love of his miserable f***ing existence. Oliver looked over at Alice before making the final blow, then took a big breath and looked back at the attacker and staked him through the heart without hesitation. Oliver breathed heavily as he looked down at his defeated opponent and pulled the stake out of his heart and threw it to the ground. As he got up, he noticed something strange under the attacker's sleeve, a sort of tattoo. Oliver pulled up the sleeve in order to get a better look at the tattoo, and what he found he could not believe. It was the symbol of the Greek vampire clan. When Oliver reached Alice, she was barely conscious. He dropped to the floor and held her in his arms as he wept. He then pulled out his phone and called Trevor to pick them up in order to take them back to the penthouse so that he could tend to her wounds. Alice lied, beaten and swollen on Oliver's bed while Trevor tended to her wounds. Oliver watched on as he sat in a chair in the corner of the room, trying to figure out why a vampire from the Greek clan would come after Alice. "I need to go see him," said Oliver as he stood up. "Would you like me to drive you, sir?" "No, look after Alice. I will be back soon." Oliver picked up his coat and made his way to his private lift that took him directly to the garage. Oliver pulled out of the parking bay and sped off in search of the immortal Arthur Carrick. He would know why the Greek clan had made a move on him. Chapter 8. Unanswered Questions. Oliver pulled up at the Millennium and marched straight over to the bar. "Where's Richard?" demanded Oliver. The bartender pointed to the corner where Richard was sitting with a group of customers sharing a meal and laughing at his own jokes. Oliver signaled at Richard and Richard came over stumbling from intoxication. "Would you like a drink?" asked Richard, clearly drunk and red as a tomato. "I need to find Arthur," said Oliver irritably while taking the drink out of Richard's hand. "What's the rush? You just got here. Don't be such a bore." "Don't FCK with me, Richard. The Greek clan came after someone I love tonight, and I want to know why." "Wait, what? Why?" "That's what I'm here to find out. Tell me, where can I find him? Is he somewhere in Albeck?" Richard, now understanding the gravity of the situation, pulled himself together. "Okay, don't worry, he's not in Albeck. He sometimes likes to come out and get a glimpse of the city whenever he gets a chance. And where do you think you can get the best view of the city?" "Empire State?" "Bingo." "Thank you, Richard," said Oliver as he dashed back out of the bar and jumped into his car, making his way to the Empire State Building. When Oliver got to the Empire State Building, he drove around the back and parked his car outside. He jumped out of the car and looked around him to see if anyone could see him. There was no one. Oliver jumped up the side of the building, climbing and grappling up the ledges like a lion after its prey. When he got to the top, he found that it was empty and looked around for Arthur, but no one was there. "Arthur!" shouted Oliver. "Arthur, I need your help." Oliver screamed his name in desperation until he could no more. "Maybe I'm too late," he thought to himself. Oliver decided that the best thing to do was to leave and go check on Alice. Oliver made his way back to the ledge and prepared to jump down when he heard the sound of someone whistling behind him. Oliver turned around and saw a man standing with his back to him, looking out at the city. The man wore an all-black suit and a fedora that was slightly tilted to the side. He turned around and looked Oliver straight in the eyes. It was the immortal Arthur Carrick. "Did you hear me calling you this whole time, or did you just get here?" asked Oliver irritably. "I heard you," said Arthur while looking at Oliver from the side of his eyes and puffing at his cigarette. "I just wanted to listen to you call out my name. It was nice. You know why I'm here, Arthur?" Oliver walked over and stood next to Arthur. "Do you still smoke?" asked Arthur while offering Oliver a cigarette. "Yeah," said Oliver. Oliver took the cigarette and lit it. The two smoked in silence until Arthur had finished his cigarette, throwing it to the ground and killing it with his foot. "Someone wants Alice dead, Oliver," said Arthur as he turned to face his friend. "Why?" "To hurt you for rejecting them. I'm sure you saw what clan that vampire was from. It wasn't just a coincidence that it happened to be the Greek vampire clan. Someone from that clan wants to hurt you as much as possible, and that someone is now the head of the Greek clan, Ophelia." Oliver, trying to gather his thoughts, looked out at the city, and then back to his friend until finally asking, "How?" "She killed King Leon and took the throne for herself. She now has the entire might of the Greek vampire army at her disposal," said Arthur. "She's going to come after Alice, Oliver. You need to figure out a plan to keep her safe. What are you going to do?" Oliver took the last puff of his cigarette before throwing it over the balcony and looking at Arthur. "I'm going to tell her the truth." Oliver thanked his friend and made his way to the edge of the building. Before he got to the edge, he had a thought and he turned around and called out to Arthur. "Can I ask you one more thing?" "Sure," replied Arthur. "You're an information broker. You only sell information to people that have something you want. I have money here in this world and in Albeck. I have numerous resources. So why is it that you have never asked me for anything in return? You own nothing of value to me. I just feel sorry for you." Oliver laughed at the blunt reply he received and continued to jump down the building and get to his car. When Oliver returned to his penthouse, he found Alice bandaged and the buckets of water next to the bed stained red from the clothes used to clean her wounds. Oliver sat down on the bed and watched as she slept. He moved her long black hair out of her face and caressed her skin with his finger. Oliver heard the door open behind him and turned to find Trevor, standing in the doorway. "Thank you for everything you did, Trevor," said Oliver. "Do not worry, sir," said Trevor. "She's going to be okay. She looks worse than she actually is. She's a tough one." Oliver laughed. "Yeah, she is." Oliver sat up straight, having not moved an inch the entire night as he watched Alice sleep, trying to deal with the guilt that felt like a virus tearing his insides apart. Oliver knew that Alice had seen him for what he truly was the night before, and he felt sick at the thought of Alice ever looking at him with even an ounce of fear in her eyes, the way she looked at the vampire who tried taking her life. Trevor came over to the bed and checked Alice's bandages. "Go sleep," said Trevor. "You look exhausted." "I want to be here when she wakes up," said Oliver, not moving his eyes from Alice. "I understand that you want to show her you care, sir, but last night was not easy for you either. You sustained quite a lot of damage as well. Go rest, I will look after her. If she wakes up, I'll call you immediately." "Thank you, Trevor," said Oliver as he headed out of the room and made his way downstairs in order to get some rest. Alice awoke that evening, slowly fluttering her eyes in order to focus her vision. She looked outside and the world was in complete darkness apart from some city lights that could be seen in the distance. She tried sitting up, but the pain in her ribs was too much and she felt herself falling backwards onto the bed. She tried once again, this time holding one arm around her waist and used the other to push herself up from the bed. As she sat up, she looked around the room confused, trying to figure out where she was. As her eyes followed the decor around the room, she started to feel lightheaded and got a headache that went through her entire brain, making the pain swell behind her eyes. She held her head with her eyes closed, screaming in agony. She watched as visions of the night before passed through her head, reliving her attack. She watched as a man stood over her in what she believed at the time to be her last moments. She tried shutting her eyes even tighter in order to block out the images and memories that rushed into her head, but they would not stop. She saw herself on the floor, lying with her head to the side, looking into the trees and seeing Oliver emerge from behind them. She watched as he transformed into a monster, throwing away any shred of the man she had spent the night with prior to that. What was he? Who was he? What happened in that moment? Was it just shock that was making her recall her memories to be more horrifying than they actually were? No, that couldn't be it. She knew what she saw. The pain lasted what felt like an eternity but eventually subsided. Alice forced her eyes open and tried getting out of bed. She moved her body and managed to get her feet to the floor. She pushed herself up while still holding her ribs. Her legs were numb and did not feel strong enough to keep her up straight, let alone walk, and she fell back down to the bed. As Alice sat helplessly on the bed, she heard the sound of footsteps coming from behind the door on the far side of the room. The door opened and it was Trevor, holding a tray with food and a glass of water. "Good evening, Miss Grayson. How are you feeling?" asked Trevor. "You slept the entire day and I was starting to worry." "Where am I?" asked Alice frantically. "You're in Mr. Page's penthouse, Miss Grayson," answered Trevor. "He brought you here last night after you were attacked so that I could take care of your wounds." "What happened last night? What was that thing that attacked me? I don't understand what is going on. Where is Oliver?" "Mr. Page is downstairs, Miss Grayson. I chased him down to get some rest and to get something to eat, for he spent the entire night by your side, watching over you." "Don't let me go downstairs," pleaded Alice while grabbing Trevor's sleeve, yanking him towards her. "Oliver isn't who he says he is. The creature that attacked me last night had superhuman abilities and Oliver killed it with his bare hands. I saw his fangs grow and watched as his fingers turned to claws. You have to get me out of here." "Miss Grayson," said Trevor as he lifted her hand off of his arm, "I know you have a lot of questions, but I do not believe that it is my place to answer you. That obligation falls on Mr. Page. I know that you are frightened and have absolutely no idea of what is going on. Any person in their right mind would be freaking out right now, but you have to trust me, and most importantly, Mr. Page. The love he has for you runs deep, Miss Grayson. I know what you saw last night was extremely difficult to witness, but the man sitting downstairs only tried protecting you as he has been doing his entire life." "Entire life? What do you mean?" "Come with me downstairs, Miss Grayson. Everything will soon be explained." Chapter 10. Tell me everything. Oliver sat on the floor in front of the fireplace, watching the flames as they danced around when he heard footsteps coming down the stairs behind him. He jumped up and turned around to face Alice, who was leaning on the railing of the stairs while still holding her ribs. Oliver rushed over to Alice and helped her down the last few steps until she was on solid ground, where she then walked over to the bar, pouring herself a drink and going to sit down by the fireplace. The two did not exchange words, but Oliver knew what she wanted. Oliver followed suit and poured himself a drink and sat next to her as they looked into the fire. "Trevor convinced me to hear you out," said Alice as she gulped at her drink rather than sip. "Is that the only reason you're still here?" "No, it isn't. I know that whatever you are, you tried protecting me last night, and that I wouldn't be here without you." "Are you sure you're ready to know the whole truth?" asked Oliver, now gulping at his own drink. "I'm sure." Oliver got up and took their glasses to the bar, where he refilled them and came back to sit next to Alice, handing her the drink. "I'm a vampire that was cursed over 400 years ago," said Oliver. "I was 25 years old when I met a beautiful girl by the name of Helena, who was the daughter of an old, sadistic woman who people claimed was a witch, which I didn't believe at the time. This girl was kind, beautiful, intelligent, and funny. When I saw her, I immediately fell in love. Every day we would meet in secret under the old oak tree that stood on the outskirts of the town where we lived, and slowly our feelings for one another became stronger and stronger, until one day we decided that our lives were not meant to be lived in this small town, and that we wanted to travel the world. We decided that we would tell our families that night, and the following morning, by the strike of dawn, we would leave on our journey." "What did your family say?" asked Alice. "I went to my family, who fully supported me. They gave me money and food for the road, and before dawn, I was ready to leave. However, things didn't go as smoothly for Helena. When she told her mother of her plans, her mother became enraged and felt as if her daughter had betrayed her. Her mother prohibited her from leaving, but Helena snuck out anyway, following her heart and going against her mother's wishes. When Helena's mother found out that Helena had run away, she cursed both me and Helena. She made it so that I would never be able to walk in the sun again, making the rays of the sun feel like the fires of hell when it touched my skin, forcing me not to go see Helena that morning. When I had not showed up to the place where Helena and I had agreed to meet that morning, Helena became concerned and quickly made her way to my house. When she got there, she found me in the outhouse where my family had placed me in order to keep me safe from the sun, and themselves safe from me. She spent the next couple of days with me, but we both knew that my condition was getting worse. The food she brought me did not fill me, and the water did not quench my thirst. Helena watched as I starved and felt helpless that she did not know what to do. One night when she went over to the main house to get more food, she left me in the darkness, and I felt the hunger ripping a hole in my solar plexus. I held onto my stomach for dear life, too scared to let go. Then for the very first time I felt my fangs growing out from my teeth, and it felt as if my teeth were being ripped from my mouth. The pain was excruciating, but what came with it was far worse. For as my fangs grew, they stabbed into my lip and gave me my first taste of blood. I quickly lost sight of who I was and felt like I was in the back seat of my own body. I walked over to the main house and found my family sitting by the dining room table, trying to figure out what to do with me. I watched them from the darkness the same way a predator stalks its prey before attacking, and before I knew it, I had leapt at them, slaughtering them all and drinking their blood. Oliver paused and for a second, looked as if he would not continue with the story when Alice grabbed his arm, squeezing it, making it that he would look at her. "It's okay, Oliver. What happened next?" Helena, who had heard all the commotion from inside the kitchen, hid under the table waiting for things to calm down before she made her escape. She crawled out and made her to the door, where she tried opening it as quietly as possible, but made the mistake of knocking one of the pans to the floor on her way out. She didn't care, she ran for her life, not looking back, but eventually fell, hurting her leg and allowing me the chance to catch up to her. She begged me not to hurt her, but I was not in control of my own body. I cried and pleaded from inside, fighting my body to stop, but my bloodlust had grown so much that my body acted on its own. She looked me in the eyes and stopped resisting, as if she had accepted her fate, and as I held her in my arms, I stuck my fangs into her jugular vein, sucking out her blood and watching as her life force slipped away. When all was said and done, I laid her body down in the meadow as my senses and conscience slowly started returning to me. I felt the pain in my heart grow and the tears gush from my eyes. I stood over the body of the woman I loved and believed that this was the true curse that I would have to live with for the rest of my life, but little did I know, it was only the beginning. 40 years had passed and I had not aged a day. I walked the lands alone with no family and no purpose, hiding in caves during the day and moving within the shadows at night, until one cloudy night I reached a stream and leaned down to get some water, when a young woman from the village nearby came to fetch water as well. She smiled at me as she leaned down to get her water, but I paid her no attention. When she was done, she got up to leave, and by some miracle, the clouds had opened and the light of the moon revealed her face, and I could not believe my eyes, for the person who stood before me was Helena. "I don't understand," said Alice. "What does that mean?" "It was part of the curse," continued Oliver. "Helena was reincarnated into this woman that stood before me. She looked exactly like her but did not share any of her memories, and I believe that this was my second chance. Until one day, memories of her past life started returning and she became very sick, and after a while, died from her illness, leaving me to walk the lands alone once again. I did not realize it at the time, but the curse of our love became more apparent with time, for Helena was reincarnated several times after that without her memories, and once her memories returned, it would mean she would die soon." "Is that why you came to New York?" asked Alice. "Yes," Oliver answered. "You are the reincarnation of Chapter 11 processing." Alice sat and looked at Oliver, who had now grown silent and looked into the fire with a blank expression. Alice didn't see the confident man she had met the night of the fundraiser, the man who ended every sentence with a light-hearted giggle, the man who seemed as if the world could throw nothing at him that he could not handle, the man who seemed to never let anyone close enough to know his true feelings. No, this was not the same man. The man that sat before her had a clear look of sadness and guilt in his eyes, for his eyes glimmered from the tears that he held back. This man did not cover his emotions or what he really had on his mind. He had let down all the barriers between himself and her. He was completely vulnerable. "None of it was your fault, Oliver," said Alice, breaking the silence. "You didn't try taking Helena away from a life that was better for her. Helena made the choice to leave with you, no one forced her. But if I didn't ask her to leave with me, she could have had a chance to live a normal life. Maybe things would have turned out better for her. You don't know that, Oliver. You're torturing yourself, believing that this curse has been your fault this whole time. But it wasn't." Alice got up and moved closer to Oliver and took his head in her hands and turned his face to look him straight in the eyes. "Your only sin was falling in love with Helena, and if I really am the reincarnation of Helena like you say, then I understand better than anyone why she wanted to run away with you, regardless of the consequences. You're a good man, Oliver." Alice kissed Oliver on the forehead, then forced herself up, still feeling the pain surging through her body. As Alice struggled, Oliver jumped and helped her to her feet. "I need to go now, Oliver," said Alice while holding onto his arm. "Are you sure you need to? After what happened, I think you should stay here for your own safety." "I'll be back, Oliver. I just need time to figure out what is happening, and also I need to check on my mother. I haven't been home since yesterday morning. I need to know she's okay." "Okay, I'll get Trevor to drop you at home." "Thank you," said Alice as she kissed him on the cheek and let go of his arm in order to get her belongings and made her way to the door. Trevor dropped Alice in front of her home, and she greeted him before making her way through the little gate that opened up to a small path that led to the front door. Alice opened up the locks, and as soon as she was safely inside, Trevor took off. Alice locked up behind herself and put all her things down on the table when she came in. "Mom," Alice called out, but there was no response. Alice grew worried and made her way to her mother's room, where she found her bed empty. Alice started to panic as she felt the heat building within her from anxiety, scared of what might have happened to her sick mother. Alice tried calming herself down, and tried to evaluate the situation. Her mother couldn't just vanish, she thought to herself. Maybe her mother got worried about her because she had not been home in 2 days, and she maybe went over to the neighbors to try and help her look for me. "Yes, that must be it," said Alice, trying to convince herself. She pulled herself together and made for the door in order to go see where her mother was when she heard a sound coming from the kitchen. Alice walked down the passage and turned to the kitchen and noticed that it was the only room in the house that's light was on. As Alice moved closer, she heard the sound of metal pots knocking against one another. Alice took out a bottle of pepper spray from her pocket, arming herself, for she was not ready to get jumped again. Alice took the corner and looked into the kitchen and found Hale sitting alone by the kitchen table. "Mom!" shouted Alice as she rushed over to embrace her mother. Hale looked up slowly, her eyes puffy as if she had been crying all day. Hale looked at Alice, realizing it was her daughter standing in front of her, and opened her arms to her. The two embraced one another and held each other as if life itself depended on it. "Where have you been?" asked Hale as she pulled away to get a better look at Alice, who looked pretty banged up and bruised. Alice thought for a bit before she answered, and eventually told her mom she had gone out with Sammy the night before and some thug tried robbing them, but they managed to get away. Alice thought that lying would be the best thing to do right now, for the sake of not worrying her mother, and in order to give herself time to understand this new world she had been flung into. "Sit down," said Hale as she got up to set 2 cups on the kitchen counter and filled them with the tea that she had on the stove. She sat down in front of Alice and handed her a cup. "Do you want to talk about what happened?" asked Hale. "I know that ever since I became sick, you've been taking care of me, but even though I am not the strong woman I used to be, I am still your mother, and if my child needs me to be there for her, I will be there." Alice looked up from her cup and smiled at her mom. "Thank you, Mom," said Alice. "I'm okay, don't worry about me. I love you." The two spoke for a bit until eventually Alice helped her mother to bed. "Get some rest, okay?" said Alice as she tucked Hale in. "Okay, but you do the same." Alice nodded and made her way out of her mother's room, and into her own, where she found her bed and tried to get some sleep. Chapter 12, Shattered Reality. Although Alice was tired, she could not sleep. She lied in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking that not too long ago she had been with a man who claimed to be a vampire, and that he had lived for hundreds of years and had spent countless lifetimes with her. How absurd. Alice thought to herself how all this could be possible, but she failed to come up with any conclusions that satisfied her. Maybe he's delusional, she thought. Maybe she was delusional for thinking he was a vampire in the first place. For if she truly believed that he was actually a vampire, then what Oliver was saying wouldn't be far from the truth. She would actually be the reincarnation of Helena. Alice couldn't accept it, but all the evidence seemed to be pointing in that direction. What if it were true, Alice thought to herself. Then what? Would vampires come after her every night? And also, why did that vampire come after her anyways? Oliver had told her so many things, and she felt so overwhelmed that the question slipped her mind. All she knew was that the world had revealed a side to itself that was so different, and so overwhelming and so interesting, that it scared her. Not even her natural curiosity of being a journalist made her want to uncover the truth. Could this not all just be a dream, thought Alice to herself? But every time she did, the pain from her injuries would pull her back to reality. Alice couldn't stop thinking about what this all meant, but she also could not take the pain, and after a while of struggling, she finally managed to calm down her mind and relax herself enough to fall asleep. When Alice woke up, she felt that something was different from when she went to sleep the previous night. She looked under her clothes and there were no bandages. She got out of bed and realized the marks and bruises in her face were gone too. Alice wept as she fell to the floor, truly believing that everything that happened to her was just a dream. Alice picked herself up, wiped her tears and smiled into the mirror. Today is a new day, thought Alice. She quickly moved around the house with a hop in her step, checking on her mother, then getting dressed and finally finishing up breakfast. She was happy. The night before she had a terrible dream of being attacked by a vampire and finding out that Oliver was a vampire as well. But when she woke up, that's all it would ever be, Alice thought to herself. Just a dream. Alice made sure to make enough breakfast for her to eat as much as she could, and to be able to leave her mom with lots of food as well. She then packed up all her things and made her way outside. Alice breathed in the city, and although New York was not famous for having the cleanest air, the deep breath still brought joy to Alice that made her feel like a weight had been taken off her shoulders, not having to carry the burden of knowing she lived in a world where anyone that walked past her could be a potential vampire or werewolf or whatever else she dreamt of the night before. Alice walked up the block and didn't wait long to get a taxi. Traffic wasn't heavy and Alice got to work on time for a change with a couple of minutes to spare as well. She grabbed 2 coffees before going in and tipped the coffee vendor because she was in a great mood. Her interview with Oliver had gone well, and she could finally write the piece that she'd been planning for days. The lift was quite packed, but Alice managed to squeeze in. She pressed the button for the 13th floor and the doors shut behind her. How normal the day felt, she thought to herself. It was plain and boring, but it made her feel safe, and that made her happy. Alice got out on her floor and looked around the office. She knew that she had been there just yesterday before the interview with Oliver, but the office felt foreign, like she had come from a long vacation and had to adjust to the environment once more. Alice walked over to her cubicle where she found the flower still standing on her desk that Oliver had sent her. But she found it strange that the petals looked somewhat withered when just yesterday they were blood red. Alice sat in her seat and started biting at her nails, trying to wrap her head around why everything felt so different. But just as Alice was drifting into her own world, Sammy came around the corner and almost fainted at the sight of Alice. "Alice, where have you been?" "Hey, what do you mean? I saw you yesterday, didn't I?" "No, Alice, you haven't been to work in 4 days. No one could get hold of you. Where were you?" Alice could not believe what she was hearing. She felt all the happiness inside her disappear and be replaced with fear. Alice tried to stay calm, but internally she was freaking out. She felt nauseous and felt the vomit building up inside her throat. Alice got up and pushed Sammy to the side and ran for the bathroom. Alice flung the door open and ran into a stall to throw up. She didn't want to believe what happened was true. Alice pulled her head away from the toilet and sat on the ground of the stall crying, wishing that life wasn't playing this cruel joke on her. "FCK!" screamed Alice. She hit against the walls of the bathroom stalls, then pushed herself up and flushed the remains of her happy breakfast down the drain. Poetic justice, she thought. Alice walked up to the basin, looking at her ruined makeup, and thought to just wash her face and rinse her mouth while just trying to pull herself together. Alice leaned over the basin and rubbed the makeup off that had been ruined from her tears. She cleaned her mouth and spat until her mouth was clean, then turned the water off and grabbed a paper towel to wipe her face. But as she moved the paper towel out of her eyes, she saw herself in the mirror. But there was one problem: it wasn't her she was seeing, it was someone else. It was Chapter 13, It's All Real. Alice jumped away from the mirror as she looked at the person standing before her. Her hair longer and her clothing from a time long past, but she could not deny it, they had the same face. Alice moved slowly backwards as she stared into the eyes of Helena, who looked directly back at her, with a cold stare. What is happening, thought Alice, was everything Oliver saying true? Alice moved back and knocked into the door of the bathroom stall, startling her and causing her to break eye contact with Helena. When Alice looked again, Helena was gone and Alice was left in the empty bathroom, gasping for air. Alice breathed heavily as the sweat ran down the side of her face. She had grown pale from the shock and looked forward, waiting to see if anything would happen again. She stepped forward, slowly looking at herself in the mirror while touching her face in disbelief. It was all real, Alice thought to herself. She really had been attacked by a vampire, she really was out of work for the past 4 days, but most of all, she really was the reincarnation of Helena. As Alice stared into the mirror, Sammy burst into the bathroom in search of Alice. "Alice, are you okay?" shouted Sammy as she rushed towards Alice. Alice turned slowly to face her friend as tears gushed from her eyes. "What's happening to me?" cried Alice. Sammy grabbed Alice and held her tightly in her arms while stroking the back of her head as Alice sobbed into her shoulder. "It's going to be okay," said Sammy. "Just calm down, all right? Tell me what happened." Alice struggled to find her words, but eventually managed to get it out. "I can't." "What do you mean you can't?" "I can't tell you because I don't know either. Everything doesn't feel real and I don't know how to deal with any of it." "Is it your mom? Is her health acting up again? Look, if you need more help taking care of her, I can come over and help with some things." "No, it's not that, Sammy, it's Oliver Page." "The billionaire? What happened? Did he turn out to be a creep?" "No, Sammy, no. It's just that after I met him, things in my life just seem to make less sense and I don't know what to do." "You do what Alice Grayson does," replied Sammy, now with a big smile on her face. "You face it head on. Girl, you have worked your ass off at this magazine, following down leads that led you to places that would make Brian SHT himself. You got this, okay? Now perk up." Alice looked up and smiled at her friend and nodded. "Okay," said Alice. Alice washed her face and reapplied her makeup and made her way out of the bathroom with Sammy. "Hey, by the way," said Sammy as they walked to their cubicles, "I didn't get to tell you this earlier, but we have a new editor coming on board. Apparently she bought a large portion of the shares of the company, and she wants a more hands-on position here." "Who is she?" asked Alice. "Ophelia Anderson," replied Sammy. "She's a big-time fashion icon and made a name for herself with lots of different clothing brands. If you're somebody, you're probably wearing her." "Wow, you really did your homework," laughed Alice. "Nah, we just got briefed when you weren't here," laughed Sammy. As Alice sat down, she saw the bouquet and it reminded her of Oliver. "I have to go see him tonight," thought Alice. She moved the flowers to the side of her desk and looked into her handbag for her notebook that Oliver had slipped in again after she had dropped it during her scuffle. As she read through her notes, she felt somewhat betrayed and also guilty. Was any of these notes even real, or just a well-rehearsed story? The article would definitely skyrocket her career, but it would be at the expense of the truth. Alice contemplated long and hard before giving in and writing the article. The article came along nicely and told the story of a young billionaire who had made his money through a small loan he received from his already wealthy family, and used it to buy up property around the world. The article also spoke about future projects that Oliver would undertake regarding development and infrastructure in poorer countries that he had visited throughout his travels. Alice finished the article and looked at her screen. All these ideas that he spoke of, were they even real? He joked that the donation he had made of $250 million was just to get her attention, but the joke didn't seem too far off from the truth. Maybe it was the truth. Nevertheless, the article was complete and Alice felt satisfied having finished her biggest milestone within her career thus far. Chapter 14: More Answers. Alice knocked on Oliver's door and felt hesitant while waiting for someone to open. Any normal person would have stayed away and never looked back at this world, thought Alice. But no, here she stood, wanting answers. There were many things on her mind, but something that had plagued her all day besides all the reincarnation and vampire stuff was how was she healed? She remembered Trevor tending to her wounds, but it didn't seem like he was doing anything special. I have to ask him about it, she thought. As Alice went over all her questions in her head, the door opened and it was Oliver. She looked at him and saw the dark bags under his eyes as if he had not slept for days. He reeked of whiskey and cigarette and looked just about ready to die. "Alice, you came back?" "I didn't think I would," said Alice. "But there are so many things I need to know, because if what you said is true, I need to know everything about my past lives and about the world that you come from." Oliver invited Alice in, and as soon as she walked in, she noticed the empty bottles of alcohol scattered across the room. "Your place looks like SHT, said Alice. "Yeah, I've been meaning to tidy up, but I got caught up in templating the last 400 years of my life," replied Oliver. "Do you want anything though? I still have plenty of bottles stored away that Trevor doesn't know about." Oliver stumbled around to the back of the kitchen counter and bent down to grab a bottle when Alice stopped him. "No, Oliver. I think you've had enough. We need to talk, please come sit down." Oliver made his way around the counter again and sat down next to Alice. "Oliver, look at me. I need you to tell me everything, okay? Today I went to work and apparently I haven't been there in 4 days. Also, all my wounds were healed from the other night and nothing disappears that fast. The bandages were even missing. And on top of all that, I saw Helena today." Oliver looked as if he was pulled out of his drunken state and now sat up straight and was on full alert. "What do you mean you saw Helena?" asked Oliver, sounding very hesitant. "I went to the bathroom at work and when I looked in the mirror, she was looking straight at me. She looked exactly like me, Oliver. Tell me what is going on." "Alice, first I need to tell you something. The way your wounds were healed was not me or Trevor. I have no idea how that happened." "What do you mean it wasn't you? You treated my wounds, didn't you?" "Yes, we did. But Trevor does not possess any magical abilities. All he did was give you first aid. However your wounds healed, it must have been something else. Something must have happened to you within those 4 days." "I don't understand," said Alice. "Me neither," replied Oliver. "FCK Oliver. What about Helena? Is this how it starts? My terrible fate." Oliver stayed silent for long, thinking hard about how to answer Alice's complicated question. The answer should have been a simple yes, that is exactly how it starts, but Oliver was confused as to how it started so soon after they reunited this time. Her memories would normally take 6 months to come back, and Oliver didn't want to tell her that things were different, and that there was the possibility of the timeline moving up. The answer wasn't a simple yes anymore. "I don't know how to answer you, Alice, I really don't. I hate myself for not knowing. Yes, this is exactly how it starts, but for some reason the curse is different this time." "What do you mean different?" I only learnt about your existence a couple of weeks ago. I didn't know that you had been reincarnated again. Normally I would find out much sooner. I have a friend, his name is Arthur Carrick. He's known as the Immortal and he's an information broker. He knows about most things in and around the Earth realm and the realm of Albec, where the other mythical creatures reside, but even he didn't know that you had been reincarnated up until a few weeks ago, which is when he contacted me. Why is it different this time? Did you ask the Immortal? Yes, I asked him, but he didn't know, and that's what unsettles me the most. I've been trying to break this curse for 387 years, and I still haven't found anything. I'm nowhere closer to breaking it now than I was back then. FCK. What happened to Helena's mother? Can't she break the curse? Tabitha? No one knows where she is. She went missing a couple hundred years ago after attempting to kill King Leon, the previous ruler of the Greek vampire clan. She didn't succeed and after that she went into hiding. Why did she try killing him? Was it over a power struggle or something? No one knows what their relationship was or why she tried killing him. All I know is that the new ruler of the Greek vampires wants something from you. I'm not sure what it is, and until I find out, I don't think you're safe going back home. Stay here, Alice. I can't just come and stay here, Oliver. What about my job? What about my mother? I can't leave those things behind. Let me ask you this, in any of my previous lives, have I died before my memories came back? Well, no, actually. Then don't worry about my safety for now, Oliver. My memories haven't come back yet, so I should be okay. Everything is going to be fine, alright? We'll figure this out. Alice got up and kissed Oliver on the cheek and made her for the door. I'll see you soon, okay? You still owe me Chinese, said Alice. Oliver let out a small giggle. Yeah, I do. Chapter 15. Enter Ophelia. Alice left Oliver's penthouse and instead of going home, found herself making her way back to the office. She had too much on her mind but had even more things to take care of at work. Alice got to work somewhere close to 11 p.m. and checked in at the front desk before making her way up to her floor. The entire time she could not help but ask herself if Oliver even answered any of her questions, or just gave her more to think about, on top of the things she was already questioning. Regardless, she had to accept that everything was real, and that reality as she knew it, no longer existed. Alice got to her desk and started tending to her files that had accumulated over the days that she had been out of work. She didn't realize it, but she completely threw herself into her work to try and block out any thoughts of the things that she could not understand with thought of the things that she actually could. When Alice finally looked up from her work, however, she noticed that her colleagues were already coming in the next morning. She checked her clock and it was 8 a.m. Alice sat back in her chair and rubbed at her eyes when she was startled by the sound of a cup being slammed on her desk. Rise and shine, said Sammy, who had placed a tall latte in front of Alice on her desk. Alice opened her eyes and they both found it weird that this scenario looked all too familiar, but usually the roles were reversed and they both laughed. Thanks, said Alice while picking up the cup and bringing it to her lips before she noticed Sammy didn't have a coffee of her own. Was this yours? Yeah, but a few days ago I was suffering from a hangover, the likes that this world rarely sees, and you brought me one of those, so I say we're even. Alice laughed and thanked her friend, then brought the coffee once again to her lips and drank every drop. Wow, you really needed that, hey? Did you grab a drink after work last night? Nah, I went to Oliver Page. We spoke about many things, and instead of putting my mind at ease, it was racing more than ever and suddenly I found myself coming back to the office. I didn't know where else to go. Well, I think that was a good move, considering that Ophelia Anderson will be coming in today to check up on all our recent projects. What time will she be here? Asked Alice. I think they said she would be coming a bit later in the day. Perhaps it's due to the bad weather outside, I don't know. But anyways, let me get to work. Alice didn't care too much about the new editor for she had too much on her mind. Up until a few weeks ago, her only priorities were hospital bills and getting the next big scoop. She realized that ever since Oliver had showed up, she had been distracted and work didn't seem all that important anymore. However, as big as her new problems were, her old ones did still exist. She did still need and want to make a name for herself, and her mother's hospital bills were not going to pay themselves. Alice got up and walked to the bathroom but stopped right before she walked through the door. I wonder if it will happen again, Alice thought to herself. Would Helena reveal herself once more? Would she come to visit her again? Alice irritated herself with all the questions but eventually walked through the door, and went straight over to the basin in order to wash her face. Alice looked up, expecting to see Helena, but she was not there, and Alice sighed a sigh of relief before tidying herself up and making her way to her cubicle once more. Alice worked the entire day, not even stopping for lunch, and just as she saw her colleagues come in that morning, She watched as they all packed their bags getting ready to leave when Christina came out to the bullpen along with a tall slender woman, with lips as red as blood and who wore her long blonde hair down. She looked cold and unwelcoming as she looked around at all the people sitting within the bullpen before making direct eye contact with Alice. "Everyone, can I please get your attention?" asked Christina while rubbing her hands together. She looked nervous, and that was very unexpected of Christina. Perhaps it was the coldness of the person who stood next to her. For although rather beautiful, she had a feel to her that was rather unpleasant. "I know that we've been speaking about the magazine getting a new editor lately, and today I am proud to finally introduce you all to Mrs. Ophelia Anderson." Everyone greeted her, and she smiled a cold smile at everyone but again found herself locking eyes with Alice. "Good evening everyone," said Ophelia, now turning from Alice to everyone once again. "It's nice to meet you all, and let me just correct you on that, Christina," said Ophelia while turning to face Christina. "It's Ms., not Mrs. I did not have time to marry, for I have spent my life trying to build an empire that would be recognized throughout the world, and I have come here to this magazine to do no less. I will be turning this magazine into something that it never dreamed it could be. Thank you." Everyone looked seriously at Ophelia, trying to process the strong entrance she had made. She was clearly there with a goal, and with her drive it didn't seem like she would let anything stand in her way. "One more thing," said Ophelia. "I am looking for Alice Grayson." Alice first didn't respond. She felt confused. Why and how did Ophelia Anderson know of her? She tried thinking about it but suddenly felt herself being pushed to the front by Sammy. "Hi, that's me," said Alice while putting her hand out in order to introduce herself properly to her new editor. Ophelia turned to her and smiled, taking her hand and squeezing it tighter than was necessary. "I really loved your piece on Oliver page, Miss Grayson. It was very captivating and well written. Oliver is not the type of man to let any details about his life be known to the public. You must tell me your secret." "You know Mr. Page?" asked Alice, now feeling something other than confusion, fear. Oliver was not known to the world in any capacity up until a few days ago when he had made his large donation that turned the heads of even world leaders, and now this person comes in and asks about him so casually as if they had known one another for years. Also, with Oliver's past, it was safe to say that anyone who did know him probably wasn't good news either. "Yes, I know Oliver," replied Ophelia. "We go way back. Like I said, he was never a man to open up easily, so well done on the article." "You must tell me how you did it," said Ophelia as a smile grew on her face. Alice felt fear overtake her body. Oliver never brought with him any good news, but then Alice thought to herself again. She had only met Oliver a few weeks ago, but that didn't mean he didn't have a life before that. Perhaps they knew one another from the business world, seeing that they were both very successful. Her body eased up and a forced smile grew on her face. "Just hard work," replied Alice. "Well, I look forward to working with you," said Ophelia before turning and heading back to Christina's office. "Thank you," said Christina before following Ophelia back to her own office. Alice and Sammy looked on as the two ladies walked back to where they came from. "Why did Christina look so worried?" asked Sammy. "I don't know," replied Alice. "But I've come to realize that knowing Oliver Page comes with a lot of consequences." There was a knock at the door and Trevor made his way to open up, thinking that Miss Grayson might have come back to speak to Oliver, but when he opened the door, he was greeted with a hand grabbing him at the throat and lifting him off his feet. It was Ophelia. "So you must be the new servant boy," said Ophelia while watching Trevor struggle to get out of her grip. Oliver heard the scuffle and quickly ran down the stairs to see Ophelia holding Trevor like a rag doll in her hand. "Oh, hello," said Ophelia as she saw Oliver come down. She threw Trevor to the side, straight into the wall, breaking the tiles with his back. "Trevor!" shouted Oliver as he looked at his friend laying injured on the floor. Oliver listened and could still hear a heartbeat, meaning he was still alive. "Why the FCK are you here, Ophelia? Oh, Ollie, is that really how you greet an old friend? I thought for sure you would have missed me. You sent that vampire after Alice the other night. You almost f***ing made my life worse than it already is." "Well, that's exactly why I came here tonight. You see, Oliver, the other night when I sent that vampire after Alice, I sent him there to die." "What? I don't understand." "Yeah, you never do. You see, I sent him there to show you that I can easily get to Alice whenever the FCK I want. I'm here tonight to tell you how your life is about to get a whole lot worse. I'm going to let you watch your precious Helena or Alice or whatever the FCK you call her, die again. But not before I get what I want from her." "What makes you think you're walking out of here alive? You just told me your plan. I could stop it right now by snapping your neck." "Yeah, you could definitely kill me here, but I have people with eyes on Alice as we speak, and if I don't call them within the hour, they'll carry out my dying orders." I told you, Oliver, the other night was just an example of my reach. Don't f***ing test me. Ophelia walked over to Oliver as he stared blankly in her direction. She kissed him on the cheek and made her way out again, but not before turning to get in her last words. I'll see you soon, Ollie, said Ophelia as she smiled at him, and then disappeared into the darkness of the night.